Well, I'm looking out here at the audience. This is a brave group that came in tonight. Thank you for coming in a nor'easter.
Yeah. I was expecting about 4 people, so I'm delighted.
Well, welcome to Talking Art in Maine. I'm Jane Dahmen. I'm an artist from Newcastle. Unfortunately, Andrew Fenneman sends his regrets. He could not make it. He was very disappointed, but he's home with a hot water bottle on his head by the fire trying to nurse a cold. So we send him good energy and hope he's back soon. I want to thank our sponsors, H.M. Payson, Maine Home and Design, and our friends from LCTV who are recording the show tonight. Thank you very much. And I want to ask you to please not take any photos. I don't think that's ever happened in here, but I want to remind you not to do that, please. Well, tonight is my great pleasure to welcome Alan Magee to Talking Art in Maine. Alan is a painter, a printmaker, a sculptor, a musician, a singer-songwriter, a puppet maker, a filmmaker, maker of animations and constructions, and what I feel is a deeply spiritual realist. Alan, welcome to Talking Art in Maine.
Thank you, Jane. Thank you.
You grew up in Newtown, Pennsylvania, attended art school in Philadelphia, and in 1969 you went to New York and became an illustrator. I wonder if you could talk about the fact that when you were in school, you were given a lot of freedom as an illustrator. You weren't in the fine arts, you were in a fine arts college, but you were in the illustration department. And then when you went to New York, you were really on your own. You were given a lot of freedom. How did that, you sort of steered into surreal art?
Well, the way this began for me, I went to art school like a lot of young people interested in drawing and painting. And when I entered the Philadelphia College of Art, this was in my 3rd year of school, my intention was to continue on in the fine arts department, but it was common in those days for a fine arts department to be heavily weighted towards abstract and conceptual work, and since I was more of a drawer and painter, it was made much more easy for me to go into the illustration department and a little bit more difficult to continue on in the fine arts. I didn't really have any idea about being an illustrator. I, in fact, didn't really know what that was. I mean, I didn't know much about that field. I just would say something about that period, that a lot of young people ended up in illustration or in practical arts because of the kind of drift toward abstraction in those days. But all of this worked out just beautifully for me because I met wonderfully talented kids in the illustration department, and because of learning this kind of new way to apply drawing and painting out in the practical world, I did start to do jobs while I was still in school. So you're right. That in a sense, the freedoms that I enjoyed kind of began in my last year of art school, and I was among a small group of students that went up to New York just to see what we could do to pretend that we were grown up and try to introduce ourselves as illustrators when really that's what we wanted to be. But it was a wonderfully open time, and nobody ever asked, really. I think the way I was able to get jobs in those days was simply showing a portfolio. And
well, you were good. I mean, we know you were good. You had covers of Time, covers of the New York Times magazine, and then many book jacket covers that you designed, and you had the freedom to basically read the book and decide what you wanted on the cover. Is that right? That's true, and that also might be typical of an extremely open and creative time. This was sometimes referred to as the second golden age of American illustration. This would be the kind of end of the 60s in through the decade of the 70s. The first golden age would be the age of Howard Pyle and N.C. Wyeth, when illustrated books were such a big deal in the United States. But this was a kind of a more raucous, creative. There were a lot of magazines out there covering
politics and popular culture. So, and illustrators were able to function in a sense, almost like a branch of journalism. Illustrators would often come up with a concept for a magazine spread, or in my case, covers. This is what made it a pleasure for me to do that.
Mm-hmm. A lot of freedom. And so what were your favorite books? Who was writing in a way that you loved to illustrate?
I got very lucky, because my style, I never was inclined to paint a scene from the book, to try to depict the characters or anything. Usually I was more interested in taking a concept or something that's surreal and seeing if I could essentially make a symbol out of the whole tone and the narrative. And at a certain point, I was given, just kind of out of nowhere, a book by Graham Greene. He's an English writer and a fascinating man, really, a person with enormous knowledge about the worlds of espionage and international affairs.
You met all these people.
I didn't meet Graham Greene. We did have a correspondence sometimes having to do with covers. Mm-hmm. I never met him, but I admired him very much. And out of that one book, I got a whole lot of other Graham Greene books. And since you're mentioning it, and I mean, it's kind of worth describing what coming across a writer like that for me was like as a young man. The example of his work seemed to indicate to me that there was much more to life than responding to writers' work. As much as I enjoyed and loved that work, I felt it was time to kind of leave that behind and just see what I could make out of my own life. And Graham Greene played a very important part.
I see.
That that find out about life as best we can, and then make something of it. So
right, comes out of you instead of doing something for
right.
somebody else. Mm-hmm. Right. Well, and this led you to the paintings for which you are quite well known, very well known, the stone paintings. Tell us about how you first came across a pile of stones
yes.
and decided that they knocked you out.
Yeah, they did kind of knock me out. I think it was part of a two-sided situation. I think probably a lot of illustrators might reach a point in life where they might come to the conclusion it would be nice to do personal work. Not that illustration isn't personal work. It is.
But it's coming from someone else that
right.
you're interpreting.
So during that transition, we moved to Maine, and my thought was, although this is kind of a backwards way of going about things, that if I could just be distant from New York — we didn't live in Manhattan anyway, it was an hour's commute out of New York — but if we could live up here, the jobs might thin out, and I could just kind of begin to get my bearings in a different way.
Why did you choose Maine?
Well, I don't know, but I think, to tell you the truth, when I was just a kid in first grade, kindergarten or first grade, I saw a map of the United States, and Maine looked like the right place to be. Way up there in the Northeast, and nobody can find us up here, so it seemed like a good getaway.
That's a good reason.
Good reason. And it turned out, of course, that I had to discuss this with Monica, and we decided that we came up and moved to Camden in the late 70s, and with the idea that if we didn't like it, or if she didn't like it, we could move back to Pennsylvania. But in the end of that year, I know you asked me about stones. I will get back to them in a minute. But Monica, in the fall of the summer we moved, said, I like it here, and I think this is where I want to be. Mm-hmm. So about that time, a friend took us to Pemaquid Beach, and I just thought the stones were so beautiful. This is something you don't see around Pennsylvania or the coast. And without really putting it all together, it just turned out that that was the branch I needed to jump to, having kind of maybe departed this illustration world, that there was something out there. And it was a start, a bridge. The piece that you have here is not from that period, it's pretty recent. This is called the long-distance friendships. And we've been
Right.
spending a lot of time out in California, in a beach south of Santa Cruz, and then, of course, the Maine beaches. And we have a lot of friends out there, a lot of artist friends and that we've met and gotten close to over the years. So this piece is, for me, kind of symbolic. There's a stone from each of those coasts.
From coast.
Coast,
to coast.
yeah.
Oh my gosh, I didn't know that. I'm sorry, I didn't realize
Well,
that was
it's called the
out of
long
it.
distance friendships, and nobody would know what
Yeah,
it meant if I
yeah.
hadn't explained
Well,
it.
a lot of your paintings, some of the titles, I'm not really sure what they mean, but it's intriguing.
Yeah,
it's your
just to confuse people. That's usually the.
But it's something that means something to you,
Yeah, it does.
and then the viewer can kind of make what they want of it.
That's true.
I like that.
And I'm not kidding. I am kidding. Actually, the titles aren't frivolous. Usually, I put some effort into having. I don't mean them to be a puzzle, but for me, they make sense,
Sure.
and they somehow summarize the intentions of the piece.
Here's another one of them. How big is this one?
It's about 64 by 80 something. It's
Big.
not that big, but it's a big painting. But
But you've done bigger.
well, 6 by 8 feet is the biggest, and anything beyond that is kind of hard to handle and
Right.
and pick up.
And you have had tapestries made of some of these.
Some of
and
these,
I had
yeah.
some people ask me about your tapestries, and so I wanted to be sure to bring that up.
Well, the tapestries, it was not my invention, but this is something that kind of crossed our path because of two of our California friends. They had an assignment to do some big tapestries. It's a long story, but they did some tapestries for the biggest cathedral in the United States. That's called Our Lady of the Angels. It's out in Los Angeles. And a friend of mine did some huge tapestries, and in the process of preparing those, he had to learn how to do it. The tapestries are woven in Belgium, and he and his colleague taught me how to set up essentially a file that can be woven on the looms in Belgium. And I learned about 2001 from them, and
Really?
since then I make these. Although they're woven in Belgium, I do everything else in my studio. And
I wondered how that was done. Yeah, and you have some at the Green Hut Gallery.
yes, yeah.
By the way, Alan shows his work there in Portland at the Green Hut Gallery, and up at the Dowling Walsh Gallery in Rockland. If you want to see, you've got to see this work. I mean, it's beautiful on the screen, but you really have to see it in person. Anything else you want to tell us about these? These are Maine stones.
They are, and I think I could tell you something about these that might help you understand why these are designed rather than being landscape paintings, which is what I would think of as going to the beach and trying to paint, what a natural arrangement of stones. But this really, I think, is a combination of the impression. The strong, powerful impression of these stone beaches in Maine, but also travels to the British Isles, where there are really hundreds of amazing sites, sometimes way off in the country, other times surrounding a town like Avebury, where stones have been, in kind of prehistoric arrangements of stones, have been gathered up from the landscape and placed in, I think, more significant ways that had to do with a spirituality or just to focus attention on a beautiful piece of the landscape. So I think in a sense I put those two influences together when I brought stones in and arranged them.
And had a black background and no sand under them, or that. Is that
Right.
what you mean?
Yeah,
You've
they're-
got them, the stones themselves are the subject.
Yes.
Not the place so
And
much.
arranged almost in a way that the stones in a prehistoric stone circle would be arranged.
Interesting. And this one is called Circus Animals.
Yes,
Now that was an interesting
yeah.
title.
Well, some of you probably might recognize that. It's the Circus Animals. Desertion is a play by William Butler Yeats, and he wrote this poem. It must have been a low moment where he felt that all of his themes and his special talismans, the little things that surrounded him that he wrote about, were abandoning him, or he found the magic missing. And I kind of was thinking, well, we all have those things. We have the subjects that sustain us, really, things that sometimes these things go back as far as childhood. Quite often they do, and they keep folding and folding back again. And the reason the title comes from Yeats is because this was his theme in that poem. The things that, and he says, of course, when you have nothing more to work, you go down to where the ladders start all over again.
Mm-hmm. You love to really give attention to every special thing in your life. When you paint them, it's a sort of a love painting, because when I think of what is love, it's giving something extreme attention. And that we see in your work.
Of course, you can't give attention to everything, but I think there are these things that it's not so much, it hasn't so much to do with beauty or long attachments. I think it's just to do with some chemical attraction, some
ineffable thing.
Yeah,
you just love it, whatever it is. Yeah, we
like
all have those things.
Like a firecracker. Well, that actually has, that does have significance. Any kid who's grown up where they're illegal, they become very precious items.
Daniel Caney, who I love to quote because I think he's a very perceptive critic, he writes for the Portland Press Herald, said, when he was looking at one of your paintings at the Green Hut Gallery, he said, "Painting is the opposite of standard photography, particularly the high focus paintings that look the most like photographs. One is slow, intention-laden, and meticulous, while the other is instantaneous. Magee's sense of sustained attention is precisely why this painting feels so different from a photograph loaded with incidental information." He wasn't talking about this, he was talking about another painting, but it pertains. To be included, details had to be noticed and then rendered by the painter, while a camera includes everything it is pointed at. We can easily admire his abilities, technique, and brilliant choice of subject. Magee's sustained attention, in turn, warrants ours. And that's why I think you should go and look at his paintings, because you can't walk by one of these paintings without going back and looking again and again, because everything is just so done with so much care, and it reveals itself because of your attention.
Well, this is what you hope. First of all, I think I should say photography has its strengths, comparable strengths. I mean, if people weren't able to nab up something in a hurry, we wouldn't have the great documentary photography that we have, or war photography, all the things that you need. You need that instantaneous grasp of something going on. But I think what Daniel Caney is saying in general is something that I hope is true, and there's a kind of gravity that attaches to something that has required time to do. And I don't know what in a simple sense, yes, a person would recognize that the artist or the writer attended to each item in the painting or each paragraph in the novel. But I think there's something else, too, that a painting is able to slow you down. There's a painter that I admire, Antonio Lopez Garcia, a Spanish painter, and there's something about his work that does that for me. I think his work takes him a long time, too, but it isn't really that. It's just this enormous collection of decisions, and I guess Dan's saying that slows you down. It invites you to consider that time span, and in return, you give more time to the work of art you're looking at.
Well, and something you said, too, about the stone paintings. You said, if I examine a stone and try to understand it by mimicking it mark by mark, I will have missed how nature works. I have to get behind that and allow nature, through the movement of fluids, accidental marks, and my hand's own spontaneous movements, to describe itself. Experience has shown me that paint knows what to do, and when I paint, I am often following its lead. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, that kind of summarizes it all, but I think that you find that out by trying out various ways of working. I think there is for me, it's a paradox. It's kind of, in a way, hard for me to describe, because you do need to apply care, but always with a little sense of recognizing that the thing you didn't mean to happen might be much better. You know, as a painter yourself, Jane, this is the way it works, that you can't bear down on it too hard.
Right.
And there is something in music and writing and painting that is a kind of stiffness, and you really want to avoid. You want to be. I want to be as detailed as possible while being as casual as possible.
Well, and letting surprises happen, and recognizing that, oh, that's good. I'm going to leave that.
And you know too that when you paint, when you're roughing something out, sometimes what you get is exactly what you wanted to end up with, a gesture that defines for me, say, a quartz pattern through, I can't meticulously draw that out. I've got to do it with a brush very roughly, and then the refinements come later. So accidents are good.
Accidents are good, yeah. But you have to know how to let go of some of the control.
Yes.
And that's not easy.
No.
Especially doing the kind of work that you do, because it's very realistic. So
it's a balance, and I think back and forth. And of course, fortunately with painting, nobody sees it until you're done. Now, musicians don't have it so good. You get on stage and you've got to have it worked out.
And this is another one of these wonderful paintings. Talk about this and the meaning of letters. You love letters.
I do. I guess there was a certain point that I accepted the fact that I kind of admire trompe-l'oeil painting. Not all of it, but there are things going back historically that are just marvelous. And what that means is a painting that fools the eye. And it's difficult to fool the eye in a landscape painting. In fact, it's really impossible. You recognize that you're seeing a landscape, and your eye knows that you're seeing something flat that's replicating a vast distance. When you paint something like this, the eye looking at that painting, the muscles of the eye don't have to do anything any differently than you would if you were looking at a real stack of envelopes. You're focusing on a very narrow plane. So for the initial encounter with a painting like that, you really can't tell if you're looking at a painted object or a real thing. Beyond, that's not a significant reason to do a painting. That's, I think, for me, not enough. But it is a way to, I think, generate an initial invitation, or to get somebody to come up and say, "What is that?" And then once you're looking, the other elements that are woven into that painting can assert themselves.
But I read somewhere that you don't call your paintings trompe-l'oeil. Is that true?
Well, I sometimes...
You want to go beyond that?
It's not that, there are beautiful trompe-l'oeil paintings in their own right.
Sure.
But it's never been my sole intention just to do... there is a genre where I think the whole thing, and nothing in any way against any artists who have practiced it in the past or present, but where that illusion is the reason to be, just like in photorealism painting, the photo was kind of a reason to be. For trompe-l'oeil painting, that illusion was everything. And what I think is it's a very good element sometimes for me in putting something together.
But there's something else about this history you're interested in. You're interested in these letters that you get that you don't want to throw away.
Yeah.
You must have a lot of stuff.
Well,
in your house.
I'm taking care of that little by little.
Don't throw it away.
Yes, I do have maybe a little more than I should have, but every artist does.
I know.
Yeah.
It's true. But you said you even keep all the paintings that your mother saved of yours when you were a little boy, and I thought, oh my gosh,
no,
that's a lot.
That's something nice that a parent can do for a creative child. My mother didn't have this advantage because her own mother conspicuously threw her work away, so she
threw her daughter's
right,
work away. Your mother's.
My grandmother threw my mother's work away and made a spectacle of throwing it away, so she didn't get a swelled head. And my mother, I think, trying to compensate for that and seeing that I was interested in art, honestly saved every ridiculous scrap that I ever drew.
It's okay, but it may have given you a lot of confidence
yes,
to know that she valued those.
It was. It was a symbolic way of saying that she was paying attention and that she valued it, and that she made sure that I had something to draw on, whether it was a stack of typewriting paper or cardboards that came out of folded shirts. Those were gems.
Yeah.
It was like a
Yeah, so sometimes they're coated white.
yes. Oh, and those are the best. Yeah.
And your brother, you loved what your brother was drawing. Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah,
Both your brothers.
both my brothers. I guess I would look at them. The younger of my two older brothers could really draw very well. He had a lot of talent. The other brother was kind of interested in science and biology, and when he was, I guess, in an early biology class, this could have been early high school, he brought back some pictures of skeletons, and of course I thought that was the coolest thing anybody could ever see. So that was my theme for some years. I thought if you draw, well, of course a skeleton is what you draw. Why draw anything else?
Yeah.
So.
And you have those still.
Yeah, I haven't given that up entirely yet.
This one I wanted to include because the way you nail everything down, it's almost like the surgeon examining the patient. Do you know what I mean? There's no, those stones aren't going to roll anywhere,
no, well,
and the papers aren't going to fly off, but you've just really set them.
I don't want anything getting away when I'm working. That's part of what has to be taped out. I don't know. I like painting tape, and I guess what I did here was maybe go a little bit farther than necessary, but I love painting masking tape because it's not only, I love getting the color and the slight translucency. When you have an object like this and you've put the tape in front of it, you get a different color.
It's really trompe-l'oeil. That is trompe-l'oeil.
Yeah, and
for sure.
You want to tease people a little bit. There's a little mischief in it that people, now come on now, that's a real piece of tape. And then you think, that's
you go up and you think, is that real or not?
Yeah, so again, not the whole idea, but tape is has been something kind of fascinating me. Also, when I paint, I'm surrounded by tape, and I use a lot of it for all of these stones paintings, and it's something in my studio, like brushes and paint. Tape is just an element, like an open paint box, part of my life.
And you have also painted stamps. Sometimes you've made them up and put individuals on them that you thought should be honored. Right. Which I think is just so wonderful.
Yeah, well, right, because sometimes they get the wrong people. You probably noticed that.
Okay, tell us about this painting. Why did you, this is called Divination.
Divination, I guess.
Divine Bones.
Yeah, I was thinking about, this is a relatively new piece. I think I did this for a show in 2016. It's a fairly good size. It's 50 by 40, which is not a huge painting, but
big.
The bones themselves are kind of small, and there's a neighbor living in Friendship who gave me a box of bones, and they were actually elegant and beautiful, and I was thinking about really the same kind of general ideas that I would be concerned with of arranging stones to paint, that the way these things fall are so infinitely variable and sometimes very interesting. I spend a lot of time arranging things and.
Do you just drop them, or do you?
Sometimes if I get desperate, I'll just drop them. If I can't get anywhere, it's like a fresh start. But no, I try to arrange them, and this one crossing over in the beginning, and of course, divination. It does hint at this sort of, I guess you'd say, sort of primitive religious or prophetic idea of casting the bones, casting the runes or throwing something down where there's an element of augury, of prophecy. And not that I believe, I'm not saying that I buy into anything like that, but nevertheless there are echoes of these kinds of age-old human tendencies in arranging something. You can't escape when you arrange stones to be reminded of this age-old practice of people thinking that they're going to make something of significance by hauling stones from a long distance and placing them in a field. I think the same thing applies to a painting like this for me.
How long does it take you to do a painting like this? I know that's every artist's worst question.
And the smart aleck answer is my whole life, but I'm not going to say it. But things take increasingly a long time. I've had, not that I'm going to pretend that I've worked, if I'm working a year on a painting, that I go back to that painting every day for a year. But over this last exhibition, there were a number of paintings this size or bigger that it wouldn't have been so when I was younger. But I think I'm just realizing, I guess at this age, that there are more things that have to be, more subtleties that have to be taken into consideration. So things can, I want to tell you, when I talk about the long times that some of these realist paintings take, it's also true that some of the monotypes I can do within an hour, the black and white faces.
Right.
So there are
We'll
some
see
techniques,
those, yeah.
But these paintings are taking me in kind of an increasingly long time because there are things I just didn't consider as a younger person.
I see. And when you paint, do you paint one at a time and finish it and then go to the next, or do you have several going at once?
Well, if I'm working these long time spans, then there would be several working, and these other ones give me a break from a thing that's, it's not that the thing isn't coming together, but I'll look at it and realize this is just going to take a long time. You're not showing this piece, but there were two pieces of open watercolor boxes that I did this year, and these took a very long time, and a part of it was, of course, the grace of making a facsimile of what spilled puddles of watercolor are on an actual painted watercolor box, to get that right, and all of these. It's kind of a musical problem because you've got these two rows of paint cakes, and the rhythm from one to another is just so important. If it's wrong, it feels wrong. So
I think we did see one in the
run
endless
through.
loop. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I love that painting. Yeah,
that's called
very nice.
called Battlefield.
Yes.
And I think
was your Battlefield making the painting, or why
I
is
think
it
it
called
is, and it's not. That idea isn't original with me. It was Glenn Gould who called his piano keyboard a battlefield, and I understand.
Is this a sculpture?
Yes.
Yes. Talk about this and the subject matter.
The subject goes back, I think, to way back in my own past, where I do a lot of. If you're going to see that film later,
yes.
You'll see that a lot of my work begins with something you'd have to call doodling, sketching out things on Post-it notes or old envelopes, and this kind of half man, half bird creature is one of the things that I draw repeatedly. I guess in the early 90s, I started to make sculpture as a kind of compensation for wanting to make animated films, but realizing that it was really difficult to do alone. But the figures I was making that I wanted to animate eventually realized they could stand on their own. They didn't need to be incorporated into film or photography. So I just went ahead and continued to make things out of wood. And
what is this made of?
Well, it's made of the body is a piece of wood from the Pacific Northwest. There were some beaches up at the northernmost coast of California, one place called Crescent Beach, and it's almost like a Maine stone beach, but little bits of hardwood that have rolled around the Pacific wash up on that beach, and the most wonderful...
Like petrified wood, almost.
The
body?
They're not petrified, but they're
very
hard, almost rock hard.
And so they've been rolled around by the waves?
Yeah. So the arms are made with wire wrapped with cloth, and the head is it's a real osprey beak, and the head is made with polymer clay, and that's I buy glass eyes. Some of these are made in Germany, and I can use them in the sculpture.
You use them in other sculptures, yeah.
It's not a very big piece. It's quite huge here, but it's not that big.
How big is it?
It's about that big.
Oh, yeah. But it's sort of a cute R2-D2 effect. It's something so strange. I love looking at it.
Well, don't you think this is another thing that kind of a discovery if you make art, that it doesn't really matter how primitive something is, but maybe it's a case of projecting belief into it, maybe on the part of the maker, I would say. But even if something is quite primitive, it can really conjure up a whole life for a viewer. Mm-hmm. And I think that's part of what I maybe I could say, discovered in making these figures that you almost can't go wrong if you follow the lead, and back to the lead again, as long as you don't know what you're going to make at the beginning. I think it's important to let the thing develop.
I see.
But if
Let
I were
it
to
emerge.
if I were to say, I'm going to make now a kind of hunchback bird man with I know
Beak man.
that wouldn't have worked.
It's called grievance.
Grievance, and I think partly at the end, sometimes when I'm nearly finishing something, I kind of think about the rancor that you see in somebody is often part and parcel of an injury, and I see this creature kind of holding his stomach like a undiagnosed pain or something, and at the same time there's a kind of snarling, I think of it as a rancor, a snappiness, but he has a sore spot in his body.
He's very cute. Now, this is getting serious.
Yeah. Well,
when was this made?
a few years ago.
Is it
20
Obama's drones, or is
They
it the
would be
drones?
during the Obama administration, and I don't want to single out administrations.
No, I know, just drones.
It's part of what goes on now, as everybody knows, is drone warfare, and it's of course a way of for I guess a more palatable way culturally to take out somebody that we don't want there. But of course, there are an awful lot of innocent people getting killed with them. And I just thought how I think especially through mainstream news, it's so seldom that you really see the aftermath of a drone strike.
I've never.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen?
Well, there are news sources where you can see some of this stuff.
Democracy Now!, I guess.
Yeah. So we know that it's going on, and there have been very good studies about I guess it was Stanford. There were two. I wish I could tell you exactly, but there was 2014. There was a study in the number of civilians getting hit with these overwhelmingly outnumber the people who are targeted.
Right.
So it's out of our sight, and I guess that's why it's culturally more acceptable to us. We don't keep hearing back about our so-called our own soldiers getting killed. It's a hands-off way of.
Right.
So it just part of the work I do does address subjects like this, and I think in a way, I would feel that the work was incomplete if I couldn't take a concern like this and put it into art, a work of art.
Right. You don't call yourself an activist, but you really are a soft activist, and meaning that these things affect you and they come out in your art.
Yeah.
And
I would say maybe the reason I don't think I am an activist in any sense, but I also think that an artist has to be realistic. We can address things in visual art with the understanding that the likelihood this would ever affect policy doesn't exist. I mean, but what art can do is to register in the mind of one other person, one at a time. And I think this is whether that echoes and ripples into actual social policy. I'm not the only artist doing things like this. There are people out there whom I admire deeply that are doing wonderful work, and maybe all of us together doing work like this could, in a sense, not influence the world in a big way, but influence people one at a time. There's a filmmaker.
Yeah, the ripple effect.
Yeah.
It's much more effective than the confrontational type of thing anyway. I think it's much more heart-wrenching. Whoops. Sorry. Much more deeply felt when you see something like this, an image.
But that's what I'm hoping. I mean, I think a lot of political arguments, they're surrounded by data, by compilations of evidence on both sides, but so many things come down to things we've already learned on the kindergarten playgrounds that we know, in a sense, bullying when we see it. And I'm not talking about this image, but I mean, there are some things come down to such a recognizable taproot, and of course they're massively complicated when it becomes foreign policy.
Yeah.
But what I like to do with art is really kind of go back to those fundamental, visceral feelings of what you feel when you see bullying, or how something like that plays out on a playground. That there's the bullying, there's the victim, there's complicity, shirking away, the instinct not to be the next person bullied. So it's very complicated. On the other hand, you see it even as a child. You see this stuff, and I think it in a way helps explain things that happen later.
Yeah, I think so. They start there. You said, I want to make paintings that have vibrations which will send you into the realms of pleasure, doubt, and disorder at the same time. That's what makes your work so interesting.
Yeah, I shouldn't have said that, but because I can't explain. But I think, yes, you don't doubt, disorder, doubt. I think you first of all, I think that something is a little bit unsettling, even if it's peaceful, that it unsettles. I would have to say I still feel that that's part of the role of art, that not to simply reaffirm things that we already agree on, but to
stir things up a little.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
Well, I admire that so much. This is called War Toy.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking here, and I mean, we're getting into images that do pretty directly address social issues. What I was thinking here is the enormous push and the massive amount of material that we see. We can't really avoid seeing that kind of glamorized to the young war and participation in war. And whatever we think about it, whether or not we think that's a good thing or a bad thing, the coming out the other end is we don't have, in our media, we don't have examples of what it's like after. We'd have the superheroes, the video games, the things that, and the endless Hollywood films that make this stuff look like an adventure. But there is there is an aftermath. And a friend of ours who talks to high school kids about this stuff, he's a veteran. He was in Iraq and Afghanistan, I think, and he wants to tell young people that if they do take part in this, there's a very slim chance that they would come out of it emotionally unscathed. He just wants them to understand, not to dissuade them from participating, but that unless a person is inclined to be able to feel comfortable with violence, they may come back with psychological injuries that our field of psychology is not set up to help to cure.
That's so true.
So they're things that will last a lifetime. Not to mention the physical injuries there's a German pacifist that I had been interested in for many years named Ernst Friedrich, and back in 22 he was responding to this tragedy of the First World War, put together a book called War Against War, where he tried to show, the book is still in print, but what he wanted to do was to show people what they weren't seeing, were the kind of severely maimed soldiers that were confined to hospitals for the rest of their lives, hurt so badly. He just wanted people to see it. So he set up a museum in Berlin and created this book. So I was doing some of this work before I knew about Friedrich, but it affirmed for me that it's reasonable and I think natural that some people would kind of follow in that path, that you just simply want to refute this. We have
a propaganda thing going.
We do.
To make war, to glorify war, and the reality is so different. Yeah. So the monotypes, some of those were very large. How do you get them so big?
The monotypes, the largest plate I have is maybe this big. The very big images are woven tapestries. They have woven very beautifully. So I've been able to make some of these that you saw in the film are kind of mid-size. I've also made some that are 10 feet high. So.
Oh my gosh. So those are tapestries. I didn't know that. Okay, so this is called Drone. Do you want to say anything
Well,
about
I think,
it?
I think that was a pretty good introduction to the monotypes. What I have, I could tell you a little bit about them. I have been making work of this kind going back many years, but this particular series started in the summer of 1990, and it was before the first Gulf War, which was something that many Americans realized that was kind of bound to happen, even regardless of what efforts were being made to try to suggest other solutions. Over that summer, it became pretty clear that protesting it and that the decision was made, and it was simply going to happen as when the U.S. was ready. But I felt a certain dread about it through that summer, and put aside some realist paintings that I was doing to work on the press and make these monotypes. These were shown about the time the war began in the late fall, early winter in George Staempfli's gallery in New York. He was wonderfully supportive of this work when he saw that I was doing something that he wasn't expecting, and said, well, we're just going to show these. So that's when that series began.
It's a powerful series, isn't it? Look at that. Wow. Something about the sutures, though, make you feel like it's being mended.
Yeah, I think
it's not, as you said, it's not hopeless.
Yeah, I think that it was never my intention to make something so dark that it was just a kind of a wail of despair. I think the thing that we recognize, no matter what is going on and what people have endured over time, that people are resilient, and there is always a kind of tendency towards repair.
Yeah. And you say people have projected their own experience onto these monotype
That's right.
faces.
I'm kind of owning up tonight to where it started, but that doesn't mean that they have to be seen in that way. Barry Lopez, a writer who spoke on the film, has responded to them at the beginning, but I think not in the way, not related to the stimulus, the motivation for me to make them in the first place. He wrote a novel in 2004 using the faces as a catalyst, putting the faces around his writing studio and reading into each one a character that he could build from his own life experiences. And this book is called Resistance, and it came out, and it was about a group of friends who all ended up doing some kind of, not necessarily activism, but the kind of things that Barry and his friends and I do, the things that we talk about. It was kind of a group portrait of Barry's friends, but it sprung from Barry looking at these faces, and he was able to find the characters. So it had nothing to do with war. It had to do with Barry's looking back into his own past.
And being human, that's what he was talking
Yeah.
about. Yeah, human condition. And this one is, those who know do not speak, and the lips have been sewn together.
Yeah, it's kind of from Lao Tzu. It's a very ancient piece of literature. Those who speak do not know, and those who know do not speak.
And now we want to show a film that was made by Alan called Gun Shop. Do you want to introduce it?
I could tell you something. I hadn't made any films before, and I had just gotten my guitar out. Well, after 40 years, I played as so many of my contemporaries did as a teenager in my early 20s, back in the 60s and early 70s. But something about the Newtown incident, the shooting at Sandy Hook School, I just realized I wanted to do something, and I didn't want to make visual art and wait 2 years until we could put it on a gallery wall or try to find some museum to show a series of pictures. I thought, I can write a song. I don't know how good it's going to be, but I can write about this and treat it satirically. In other words, treat it with what I thought at the time was some degree of exaggeration, but I think when it comes to this gun issue, satire is very difficult because it keeps being outrun by reality. But what I was thinking here was that, of course, what's going to happen, I wrote this song 10 days after Newtown. What's going to happen is, as a result of this, people are going to be calling for more guns as the solution. So ironically, that's the theme of this.
Yeah.
And from the point of view of somebody who's a gun salesman, a gun shop owner.
The gun shop owner.
There's been a lot of shootings, a lot of flying lead, a lot of children in the ground, and many a teacher dead. Doctors, cops, and rappers, mothers, wives, and sons, and any fool can tell you why. It's 'cause we need more guns. If they took our guns away, the killing rates would soar. The run on knives and hand grenades could spark a civil war. Our founding fathers gave us guns, and my preacher says it too. Guns go with freedom and the flag. I'm packing and so should you. If we armed our toddlers, the slaughter would die down. We'd have made short work of that young nutcase in Newtown. If you're gonna need an AK, an Uzi, and a Glock, I'll throw in some high-cap clips, and there's plenty more in stock. Stand your ground, fire off a round if you don't like his looks. It won't do time, it's not a crime, and new law's on the books. So if he's wearing a hoodie and is shuffling his feet, you might be feeling threatened. What's he doing on your street? There's been a lot of shootings, a lot of flying lead, a lot of children in the ground, and many a teacher dead. They're attacking schools and movies, using ammo by the tons, and any fool can tell you why. It's 'cause we need more guns. Any fool can tell you why. It's because we need more guns.
Well, it's time for questions and answers. Anybody have a question? Jim, could you turn the
if we-
lights
yeah,
down and
so
then
that
we
I
can
can
see
see.
the audience? Thank you. There's a question.
Yes. Do I have nightmares? Well, probably the same ones we all have. Yeah, I don't think any more than... I think it kind of helps if you're able to... I know it's a serious question. I think if we all have nightmares, and I think I think it makes it a little bit easier if we have some kind of a creative handle on the things that frighten or trouble us. It doesn't make them go away. It isn't a solution to the problem, but I think we all need to express ourselves, whether through art or just through conversation. But I think I would probably have a lot worse nightmares if I wasn't able to work as an artist covering these themes.
Mm. Over here.
Yeah.
Do you use airbrush in your work?
Yes, the question was, do I use an airbrush? Yes, I do. It was one of those tools that I was introduced to, well, not as an illustrator. I'll tell you, I'll go back to how I got enamored of this. An airbrush is something about the size of a pen, and it's a small atomizer, a small spray gun, which can be directed to a very fine, almost a pencil line. And where I saw this was when I was about 14, there was an artist that I was crazy about named Ed Roth, Big Daddy Roth was his professional name, and he was a custom car designer. He made unbelievable, beautiful sculptural cars. The bodies were fiberglass, and then, of course, beautifully chromed engines. And at the car shows, which I used to hitchhike down to in Philadelphia, he would be there in person and paint cartoons. These were called weirdo cartoons. This was one of the earliest forms of a piece of, let's say, a T-shirt or a sweatshirt with an image on it. This was a kind of precursor to all of the illustrated shirts and things that we wear today. And you could gather around him and watch him draw these beautiful calligraphic, skillful monsters driving cars with an airbrush. He had one that he wrote with in black, and then he would have other airbrushes where he painted fluorescent colors around. So I fell in love with the tool, and about 15, I got one in a little oily compressor and learned how to use it. So I do use it. It's not good for everything. It's a very good shading tool, and it's kind of fun for me sometimes just to get the airbrush loaded up and I'll just draw with it because there's no friction. You can just, some things like these doodles, you can very easily draw something like that.
Mm. Other questions? Yes, Rosie?
Yeah.
Yes, have you distributed your song at all?
This one isn't right now, but I've had them on Vimeo and at film festivals. And I did another one that was on mass surveillance, and not so much the big surprise that there is mass surveillance, we all know it, but what I was interested in or concerned about is the extent to which the fact that we all know our emails and phones, everything that should somebody want to retrieve them, it's all there. To what extent does this put a damper on our willingness, our comfort with free speech, which is, of course, still, we still live in a country where this is a more or less guaranteed right, but we never had to face the idea that everything we said could be retrieved. So I was interested in how mass surveillance is going to influence essentially the workings of democracy. If people are uncomfortable objecting strongly to something or being part of a protest. So that got into a lot of film festivals, and it's still on Vimeo. It's called
It's a wonderful film. In fact, we have a copy. Do you want to see it? It's only a few minutes.
Until I was 8 or 9, my family had a party line. You'd pick up the phone and hear the voice of Mrs. Klein. But here's what Mother told us. Eavesdropping's not polite. Even though some people do it, it's not decent, it's not right. Then we all got private lines. We confided one-to-one. Our dreams and our opinions, a good joke or a silly pun. We took privacy for granted till these other folks logged in, taking note of what you think, tracking everywhere you've been. Party line, a party line. They've got your metadata, they know you're a friend of mine. Make like you've gone out to lunch and keep it bland and plain. You could end up on a no-fly list or on the red-eye to Bahrain. Don't call attention to yourself, be cagey and discreet. Converse about ice cream and say vanilla's all you eat. Don't start in on GMOs or any wars we failed to win. Drones are predatory loans, and don't quote Howard Zinn. Don't bring up melting ice, don't protest corporate greed. Pretend you're glued to your TV, don't let on you can read. Say, how about them Phillies? Then cite some trendy stars. You don't want a bachelor flat with concrete walls and bars. You love your social network, your new car, and your smartphone too. They all pretend to be your friend so they can rat on you. If you're getting worried, if you're feeling some alarm, just wait until they slip that little chip inside your arm. Party line, our party line. They've got your metadata, they know you're a friend of mine. Make like you've gone out to lunch and keep it bland and plain. You could end up on a no-fly list or on the red-eye to Bahrain. You might get on the fly list for the red-eye to Bahrain.
Here, Joey.
I've followed your work for, I guess, about 30 years. And when you started to do the first faces, the monotypes, I kind of worried for you.
Yeah.
I thought, oh gosh.
Hey, that's when I, went off the deep end, I guess.
No, I'm worried for you financially.
Yeah.
What's going to happen, what
Yeah.
are people going to think, and are they going to sell? And so I just wondered what did happen?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the part of I'm happy always to talk about my work and where it comes from and everything. I think this whole world of galleries and museums and what people can accept, what makes them nervous, and I think when you think about this very large world of galleries and how it's changed over the years. I know you're asking specifically about me, but the whole thing is so much about money and investment today. So while a surprising number of people have been like these enough to buy them, some of my work I just think of as being part of my role as an artist. And if I start thinking ahead of time, what's the financial side of this, it would be such a hindrance to just moving ahead with ideas. And I think for example, think of any novelist starting in with something new. Your last thing was a hit, the publisher liked it, you start a new book, and you always got to ask the question, what are people going to think? Especially if you're kind of wading off into different water. This is kind of an age-old problem for artists, and I think
It's so inspiring the way you handle it. I mean, you just do what you have to do.
yeah, and I think I don't know of any other way to live, but I have a general faith that people will catch up, and I don't mean that's because they're behind. I think they're just somewhere else, and we've been taught. And think about this: from the time we start studying about art history, Morandi is the guy with the pots and jars on a table. Van Gogh is the guy with the Starry Night. Think right up to Chuck Close is the guy with the big heads. Is this the picture of creativity that we want to teach ourselves and keep reaffirming? It isn't. I mean, it's not the way. It's not the way creativity in all of us works, because there were things that we do well, but those things aren't necessarily going to be the precise tools for speaking about the next idea that might become pertinent to us. So I think there's something wrong with nothing wrong. I mean, I like Morandi, nothing wrong, but I think we should have a different picture of what creativity is, and I think that the world of contemporary art isn't serving us very well in that respect, because already by the time I was in art school, the idea of what was called a signature style had come into play. This means that you see something from across the room, it's a Franz Klein, it's a Pollock, and that was kind of the way it worked. But it doesn't make sense to me to live like that.
So inspiring. I mean, look at the way you painted the rocks, and then you gave up so much control when you went to the prints. Really, when you think about the difference between those two, it's quite amazing.
But I think you get something else. And I should say something about the monotype. I say here that there is a great element of there's no risk. You throw away the paper if it doesn't work. But there's a high probability, or at least a probability, that working like that doesn't produce this gem that you hope you're going to get. But working in that way also gives you things that deliberation can't give you. Mm-hmm. That what comes through chance you would never think of. Nobody would ever think of it, because it's just a result of accident. The monotype is interesting because it's, well, a little bit like the computer. It gives you back what you tell it to do. And whatever I do, even if I can't see the way this ink is getting spread around, I am putting it there, but I don't know how it's going to look. When I see the paper, I think, oh, and that's what happened. So you give up a little control, but I think the return is more valuable, and especially with something like this, because although I'm not a mystic, I think the things that we blurt out, or the things that just come out spontaneously, all can sometimes have the most resonance for other people. Mm-hmm. that we don't practice or polish. But anyway, thank you. You're right that not everything is as applicable to, or at least as applicable to business as everything else. So, yeah, don't worry.
Worry about myself.
No, no. If you see, I mean, I think I don't want to. The reason I'm answering you that way is I think we're all dealing with this.
Yeah, it's a great answer, and
Yeah.
you're very inspiring. I have to say, I think you change a lot of lives when people listen to you and hear the purity of your life. You're living in such a pure way.
Well, everybody, we all have our strengths and failings, but I've been very lucky. Everything that seemed like it was a setback, like getting into an illustration class, has turned out to be a blessing. Mm-hmm. So, I've been very fortunate, and of course, any artist knows you've got to keep working at it.
You got to keep working. I saw a question here.
I just wanted to say thank you for telling the truth with your work.
Well, thank you. Thank you for saying that. I think. I think there's where you realize. I mean, there's the issue of business when in galleries and all. But I think that part of anything we do, where I think we've taken that a fundamental risk of being clear about what we mean. We're not going to have everybody agree with us. It's just going to. But I think that's part of the way it works, and I've been very happy to find that not everybody agrees with me.
Well, thank you so much for sharing with us and enlightening us. It's been a wonderful evening.
Thank you,
Thank
Jane,
you
for inviting me. This has been great for me too. And I never saw this film on the big screen before.
Oh, well,
and not
good.
Only that,
I'm glad.
Yes. Thank you, David.
Thank you all for coming out on this night. Thanks so much.